Good evening, everyone. I hope you're all well out there, and thanks for attending this Bowes Quieter Neighbourhood webinar, which is part of our ongoing process of engagement and consultation. I'm Ian Barnes. I'm Deputy Leader of the Council, and LTNs and school streets fall under my portfolio within the climate change agenda. The slide on your screen informs you of the webinar's intentions tonight, and I'm shortly going to hand you over to Richard Eason, the Healthy Streets Programme Director, to talk you through the agenda and introduce you to the rest of the team. I'm going to assume that most residents viewing this webinar tonight know why we've implemented this Bowes LTN to encourage drivers out of cars, onto foot or cycle if they're able, thus reducing pollution and fighting climate change. And also, we hope this will reduce childhood obesity by getting our children walking, cycling, scooting, by providing a safe corridor, particularly towards Bowes Primary. And this safe corridor is for the benefit of the entire area, not just the LTM. Recently, we've seen some very encouraging results from other LTNs, particularly the Railton LTN in Lambeth. And we hope to see the same success and results in our schemes. We've already had very promising results from St Monica's in the Fox Lane LTN, which has provided some great statistics going forward. I appreciate this project's been introduced with limited pre-engagement as the council responded to strict government guidelines and the government's objective of increased social distancing under COVID and the hope for a green recovery from this terrible pandemic. But our ability to implement that within the dictated timescale has led to another 1.5 million from the government for further measures across the borough. There's a lot of misinformation out there, particularly on social media, and I just want to emphasise that no decision has been made at this time on the future of the trial, and I just want to encourage you to keep entering your feedback into the consultation. It is being analysed and officers are looking at everything that goes into there. So thank you once again. I'm now going to hand you over to Richard Eason, the Programme Director.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. If we could go to the next slide, please. So I just first of all want to set out the agenda so that you know what's coming. We've already had the introduction there from Councillor Barnes, so now we're just going through the agenda, and next I'd like to go through and I'll come on to those in a little bit more detail in a second, but an overview of the project, looking at our monitoring and evaluation, which will be by Christina, communication and engagement work, which will be by Liz, and then Equalities, which will be I'm sorry if I dropped out there. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So in terms of housekeeping, yeah, just a couple of points to go through. So there is a question and answer function that you should be able to see. So do please put your questions in there. If you can break those down, so if you've got a whole series of questions, if you could add them in individually through those questions at the end. Follow and comments, we're not going to be publishing comments this evening, but we will be reviewing those and considering those as part of the consultation. So please do feel free to make as many comments as you wish, but separate out your questions from the comments. And then we'll be uploading this the webinar at sometime next week. And as Councillor Barnes said, the consultation remains the best place for your view, so please do continue to use that. Next slide, please. So just to give you some background on the project, many of you will know this, but there has been some history to the project. So ward councillors and residents, I think, have been raising concerns to start to gather some views back in 2019, and then I apologise. I will continue. Resident communication started after the back in July of 2020, and then we published an experimental traffic order in 2020. Implementation of the project started in August 2020, with consultation then starting in September. Next slide, please. So what we're going to go through, and these documents have been published on the project page today. So a series of 4 documents. We're going to look at the project rationale. We're going to look at the monitoring and evaluation plan, communications, engagement and consultation plan, and also look at our equalities approach. So you will be able to go to the project page and have a look at the documents that provide more detail on each of these areas. And what we're doing tonight in the webinar is providing you with a summary. Next slide, please. This is showing you where on the project page you can see those documents. So it's on the top right. The project page has been updated today. And we've tried to make it more accessible, reordered some of the information so that people can find their way around there, hopefully a little bit easier, but we'll welcome your feedback on that. Next slide, please. So to talk about the project rationale. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the Bowes Quieter Neighbourhood is part of a longer term programme. It's part of the wider Healthy Streets programme that includes a range of different initiatives, and they're all in place to try to generate this long-term generational change. So what we're hoping to do is increase more levels of active travel over time and create a more sustainable ways of travel as we address the challenges that are posed to us by climate change. Next slide. So there are what we're doing in Enfield is not unique, and there are a number of policies and approaches that have been published for some time now. So the Mayor's Transport Strategy is a key one for London, published back in 2018, and talks about the long-term vision of increasing more walking, cycling and sustainable travel. And that strategy looks out to 2041 and is encouraging local authorities to implement a series of measures that enable us to recreate and redesign our streets so that walking and cycling, for those that can, it becomes a more realistic option than potentially it is in some areas, which is currently very dominated by motor traffic. And in order to enable the objectives of that strategy, the Mayor releases funds to local authorities to enable us to deliver these kind of projects. So a lot of the work that we do is funded directly by Transport for London. In this instance, this project was funded direct from the Department for Transport, or certainly the early phases, as part of their emergency active travel fund. But it's not just mayoral policy. There's also national policy. So the gear change document published by the Department for Transport sets out how the government, as part of its 10-point plan and wanting to enable a green recovery, how it wants to encourage active travel. And of course, more locally, there's a series of action plans. For example, the Enfield Climate Action Plan, where it sets out the borough's ambition to reduce the emissions caused by transport and to enable people to again travel more sustainably. Next slide, please. So some of you may be familiar with these. These are what we call the healthy streets indicators, and this is essentially what we're trying to do across the borough is create these healthier streets. Now, I don't intend to go through each of these, but these are again what the mayor's transport policy. These are baked into that policy, and these are the kind of things that we want to see across our streets across Enfield. And we recognise that means bringing forward change, and in this instance it means trying different things, and that's certainly what we're doing here in Bowes, where we're running an experimental traffic order to help understand how we can address the issues in the area. So we will be coming back to look at these indicators, and they will form part of the way that we're monitoring the project. Next slide, please. So just as I bring this section to a close, I just wanted to just cover what the objectives are of the Bowes project, sitting within the context of that wider programme and wider activities and interventions across the borough. So what we are looking to do is effectively create healthier streets in the Bowes quieter neighbourhood area, in line with those indicators that we've just looked at. We think one of the key things is to significantly reduce the volume of through motor traffic on residential streets within the area, and with a view to that leading to this longer term increase in the levels of people walking and cycling, both within the project area, but also for as to create corridors for those people who are passing through that area as well. And again, if we can start to link up different areas where we're taking these interventions, then people can start to move around for some of their journeys, particularly their short journeys, in a different way, trying to reduce the current very high volume of short journeys that are conducted by private car. So they're the objectives, and we'll come to if we can go to the next slide, please. So they're the objectives, and I'm now going to hand over to Christina, who's going to talk you through the monitoring and evaluation plan, and so we can understand a little bit more detail how we're monitoring the project. Thank you, Christina.
Hi everyone, my name's Christina Gordon and I'm the project manager for this project. I'll be talking about the monitoring activities we are undertaking, which will help to inform the decision making about the scheme. Next slide, please. This slide shows the various activities that we're monitoring. Some of these are things that we can count, like cars, but for many other activities, we'll be reviewing the impacts in other ways, such as via consultation and engagement. The monitoring and evaluation plan on our website, which we've recently published, provides more details on each of these monitoring areas. We won't be able to cover them off all in this presentation due to time, but I will discuss a few more of these in detail on the following slides. I would like to note there are no set thresholds that we're targeting in order for the scheme to automatically be considered a success or not. When it comes to evaluating the scheme, each of the monitoring areas and their impacts will be assessed, alongside the project objectives, which Richard has mentioned earlier, and their setting in terms of the policy, which he's also talked about. The outcomes of each of the monitoring activities will be included in a report, which will be publicly available and published on our project website page. We've seen that traffic volumes and air quality have been raised frequently by residents, so I would like to spend a bit of time talking about how we are monitoring these tonight. Next slide, please. So, traffic is counted by placing tubes across the road for a set period of time, it's usually 7 days. We continue to review the sites where we collect data, and we have identified a couple of extra sites since the last counts were taken. This slide shows the locations in green of the traffic counts that we are taking. In July and November last year, we carried out traffic counts for 2 one-week periods. Obviously, both of these times were affected by different levels of COVID restrictions, so we plan to repeat traffic counts once restrictions ease and traffic begins to return to more normal levels. We also have several data sets from count sites in the area that were taken prior to COVID, and these will supplement the data which we've already collected and will collect. The North Circular Road is managed by Transport for London. They have traffic counters placed regularly throughout their road network, which capture data continuously. One is located at the top of the scheme, which you can see by the blue dot on the screen, and one is also to the southwest of the screen, which you can see in the little inset to the bottom left of the slide. That site is near Colney Hatch Road, for those who are familiar with the area. Next slide, please. According to Transport for London, road vehicles are the single biggest cause of London's air pollution. The pollutants we monitor regularly are nitrogen dioxide and particulate matter. We monitor these pollutants because they are set out in national and local policies, and historically levels have exceeded set targets. Nitrogen dioxide is a gas, and it forms from emissions when fuel is burned. This process is called combustion, which is a chemical process of using fuel to release energy. Particulate matter are very fine particles and is formed from combustion and non-combustion sources, such as tyre and brake wear from road transport, as well as natural sources, such as sand and pollen grains. Air quality is a very complex scientific process. By nature, it is variable, and it is affected day to day and month to month by weather and atmospheric conditions. Weather conditions such as wind, sunlight, and the temperature of the ground all affect levels of nitrogen dioxide and particulate matter in the air. A proportion of particulate matter comes from outside the immediate area and even outside London and beyond, as it can be carried long distances in the air due to its very small size. Because of this, air quality is not simple to monitor. It is also necessary to monitor air quality over a long period of time to establish trends so that the effect of weather conditions can be considered. Modelling of air quality is an industry recognised method of tracking and predicting air quality, and we've appointed external experts to carry out air quality modelling for the Bowes area. So an air quality model is a computer simulation of real-life complex scenarios. The model takes a number of things into account, such as data, mathematical equations and assumptions, and provides predicted outcomes. In this case, the outcomes are quantities of nitrogen dioxide and particulate matter. The air quality model is created using a year's worth of data to create a baseline, against which we can compare different scenarios. In this case, data from before COVID-19 is used to create the baseline. The model then uses traffic data from before and after the scheme to assess the air quality in both scenarios. The outcomes of the modelled scenarios are checked against roadside measurements. This is an essential step of all modelling. For this project, we have two different types of equipment capturing roadside measurements, which are used to check the outcomes of the model. Small devices, called diffusion tubes, are placed near roads and are widely used in the industry for indicative monitoring. They are sent to a lab each month for chemical analysis, and a single measurement is provided over the month for nitrogen dioxide. The second type of monitoring equipment for this project is a very large complex station called a real-time monitoring station. This is shown in orange on the slide. The Borough of Enfield has 4 real-time monitoring stations, which have been in place for a few years. These 4 stations are part of a network of monitoring stations across London. The locations of real-time stations are strategically selected across London by the boroughs. They provide an electronic reading every 15 minutes, which is downloaded to a central organisation and then made publicly available. Readings can be accessed via www.londonair.org.uk, and I think I've got a link on this on the following slide. So the London Air website has information and maps showing current pollution levels across London. The levels shown are based on readings from monitoring stations and air quality modelling, which is the same methodology as how we monitor air quality in Enfield and for this project. A snippet of this London-wide network, can we move to the next slide, please? Sorry about that. Okay, we'll return to the previous slide. Sorry, apologies, everyone. Okay, so one of our 4 real-time monitoring stations is located at Bowes Primary School, which you can see in orange, and the yellow sites are on Brownlow Road and Warwick Road, which are the diffusion tubes which I've talked about earlier. So this plan shows the locations of these sites alongside the traffic count sites, and all of these locations together are the various places which are capturing data to inform our air quality monitoring. Next slide, please. I'll now hand over to Dave McCaffrey, who will talk through the Equalities approach.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Thanks, Christina. My name is Dave McCaffrey. I work for Richard as the Programme Manager on Healthy Streets. So I'm just going to talk through the Equalities approach for a few slides, as I know lots of people are taking a keen interest in how this might impact on equality. Next slide, please. So this slide here just tries to articulate how we approach equality. So it's the important thing to take from it is that it's an iterative process. So it's about us understanding how we design these schemes in the first place, which can constrained by a number of different guidance sets, including from the Department of Transport, TfL, and local guidance about how we do things like crossings, what minimum widths of pavements might be, and that sort of thing. We acquire some data around how those areas may be used at the moment, and then we engage with groups to understand what people believe. We review the impact of that and return back to our design. We continue through that process until we get to a stage where we're happy to proceed. And at the moment, we're still in that iterative cycle as part of the experimental process. Next slide, please. So our duties and obligations are all laid out in the Equality Act. And what we published when we done the initial experimental commencement is we published the initial equality impact assessment of it. That's available to you on the website, and that will be iterated over time as we progress through the experiment and people continue to engage in the process by raising things with us that we may not have understood and helping us understanding more about the detail in there. Our final EQIA will be completed before any decisions made around making the scheme permanent or any changes that we might make in the interim. Recently, I'll just do with number 2. So the Enfield Council Equalities Board's recently been set up. So they're a fairly new committee at Enfield Council. It's elected members and representative groups from the community. We've given them a briefing on the scheme and some of our other schemes that we have, and we'll continue to keep them appraised of it. We've been analysing the survey responses as they come in, and we're getting lots of responses from people, and that's great. So within that survey, we can understand some of the trends and patterns in the data about the people that are completing them, so that we understand what that pattern, what the uptake rate is from various groups. We can then address any gaps that we have in the patterns that identified. And one of the ways we're doing that currently is to write to disabled badge holders to make up for a slight shortfall in the number of respondents that we have. We've currently got about 9% of responses are disabled people, and the background level is about 14% of the local population. We might then identify areas where we need to mitigate any potential impacts on people, and as part of the onward work, we'll review various studies that have been published that are all in the public domain that I'm sure many of you have seen, that review LTNs not just in Enfield but across the rest of London and the rest of the country, so that we can take some of the learning from them. Next slide, please. So what's next? So we need to make sure that all groups are adequately represented. So that means comparing the engagement responses that we have and trying to lift up any of the numbers if we believe groups are underrepresented. It's providing the next level of detail in the equality impact assessment based on the feedback that we're getting from people and any outcomes that we're seeing from measurements or other sources of information that people provide to us. We're looking at setting up focus groups to look at some specific issues that are coming through in the engagement and consultation. And then once we've been through that process, the final EQIA will be put together and presented to the Equalities Board. Next slide, please. So now I'm just going to hand you over to Liz, and Liz is going to talk to you about the communications and engagements plan. Liz.
Thanks, Dave. Hi, everyone. My name's Liz Rhodes. I'm the Healthy Streets Public Relations Manager. As Dave said, I'm going to be running through some of the activities that we've conducted prior to the trial being introduced in terms of comms and engagement, as well as some of the activities that we've done more recently since the trial's been in place. Next slide, thanks. So this image here is taken from the project page, which we've updated today. Thanks to everybody who so far has taken part in the consultation survey. So far, as of today, we've had over 1,100 responses. So please continue to share your comments, even if you've done so before. And if you haven't, do get onto that. Thanks. Next slide, thanks. So in terms of what we've done, or communications and engagement activities prior to the trial, back in late 2019, we delivered a perception survey in the Bowes area that asked residents to share with us how they felt about traffic speeds and volumes in the area, as well as other issues, and also ways that we might tackle those in the future. In early 2020, when we received the funding for this project and a decision was made to go ahead with the trial, we then delivered a project flyer to all properties within the area. So this flyer detailed the plan, also had some information on the background of the project, as well as information on the experimental traffic order and how the consultation would run. The experimental traffic order was then published in the Enfield Independent newspaper, as well as the London Gazette. And we've sent out a number of notification letters to residents, businesses and other properties in the area ahead of construction of the scheme and ahead of the consultation opening. As I mentioned, the Let's Talk project page, that's been open since 2019, and we've updated that a few times since then. As I said, the consultation survey is still live on that page. And prior to the implementation of the trial, we also conducted statutory consultation with emergency services, and that is ongoing, our communication with them. Next slide, thanks. So the consultation survey, as I've been talking about, has been open since September 2020. We've recently launched another survey which targets specifically people with disabilities, people who have carers or who are a carer for someone in the area. And this survey is really asking specific information to try and gather their views and experiences of how the trial has impacted them. So that's going to close at the end of this month. And as Dave mentioned, we're hoping to run some focus groups in the next couple of months with them as well. Also, as I've mentioned, emergency services engagement is ongoing, and we'll be providing regular updates on the Let's Talk project page in the coming weeks and months. Next slide, thanks. Oh, just back one. Thank you. So in terms of the next steps for engagement, we are currently working with an external agency who are conducting the analysis of the consultation responses that are coming in. So that's happening at the moment, and the survey is still live, so we've still got a bit of work to do around that. However, we are reading through a lot of the emails that we're receiving and the consultation survey responses to pick up on any certain issues and anything immediate. But they will be producing a report for us that will be published on the project page when we have it, and a summary will also be included in our the project report that will be developed following the trial. So the comments that you're sharing with us through either email or the survey are informing what the next steps of the project will be. So we're constantly reviewing those, and we'll be taking what is summarised in the agency's report into our future decision making. Next slide, thanks. So I'm just going to hand back to Richard to discuss the next steps for the project. Who's on mute, I think?
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, if you could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I'll just walk through these next steps. So first of all, and we've touched on this, we're going to complete the review of the Blue Badge survey. So as you've heard, that's open until the 31st of March. So we encourage people to continue to participate in that. We're seeing good levels of participation in that, and that can inform the ongoing work on our EQIA and inform the next version that's published. We then are going to the consultation on the 2nd of May, and we want to do that so that we can then take all of the comments and finalise our articles that were set up in trial. And so that's a date for people to look out for, and we will be writing to residents in the area and the surrounding area prior to that closing, just to remind people of that. We will be continuing to review the current trial. But what we'd also do is there's an options for an alternative design. So that work is going to start. Hannah have been going through their own engagement process, as we've heard, and they're gathering their thoughts. We're collecting the feedback that we've had so far from our engagement, and collectively that can design that work, and that's considering of the bus gate as well. So we'll be looking at how the bus gate features in that wider design. At step 4, there will be data collection ongoing. We acknowledge the challenge, lots of challenges presented by COVID, but certainly in terms of an impact on traffic on this project, then clearly it's done that. We can see with the roadmap that's been published, the opportunity that for traffic to return as lockdown is a risk. We need to continue to monitor this project so that we can fully impact. And then what we intend to do is report then which will include reporting on data that we've collected so far on the monitoring, as well as including the comments that we've had from the engagement. So we'll be summarising that, and also the work that happened with Harry and design to inform the next steps and to see where we go with the project from there. So, so if we go to the next slide, I think that concludes what we wanted to lead with in terms of background information. But there's lots of questions, I think, and also for us through a number of those. I'm sure we won't get through them all. We won't get through so many of them, so I'll hand you back to Liz, who I think is going to organise that process.
Thanks, Richard. So yes, thanks everybody for submitting your questions tonight. I can see there's been a lot of activity in the Q&A chat. We'll try to get through as many as we can in the time we've got. But we will be reviewing all of these as well as the comments, and we'll be updating the FAQ page on the project page next week to try and capture what everybody is asking. So I thought I would start with a question we've actually been receiving quite a lot through emails, and then I'll be getting into some in the chat. So Richard, this question is probably best answered by you. What happens if something occurs that means people can't exit from Warwick Road, and how will people get out of the area?
Okay, thanks, Liz. Yeah, this has come up before. So we have published actually, if the junction with Warwick Road is closed, the junction with the Warwick Road and the 406, and people can't exit the area via that junction, then they are able to use Warwick Road southern end. So if you pick out the angle junction, you can leave via the southern entrance of Warwick Road. We would then suspend the issuing of penalty notices during that period. And if you were to get one, you get in touch with us. We were in regular touch with Transport for London. We know there's been and therefore we could read. So hopefully that makes that clear to everyone. And that information is on the project page. And back to you, Liz.
Great.
Sorry, can I just interject? Richard, it might be worth you turning your camera off for these answers, because I think your internet connection is creaking slightly. So I don't know whether you going on to sound only might help, is my suggestion. Sorry, Liz.
That's okay. Thanks, Councillor. We've got a question about people who live on boundary roads. Christina, perhaps you could comment on how we're conducting measurement and considering people who live on boundary roads.
Thanks, Liz. I'll start by sort of talking about a couple of things, and then if other people want to sort of drop in a few extra comments, feel free to. So I want to start by saying we do know that people live on the main roads, and it is something that we are very aware of. So we want to make sure that our monitoring, we will be looking closely at the boundary roads as well as the other roads that we are monitoring, as I showed earlier in the slides. So I'll just go back to a little bit around the ideas behind the scheme. And so we're hoping that as a result of the road changes, people are encouraged to adjust their travel behaviour. So I think it's maybe by walking or cycling instead of driving, or making their trip at another time when it's less busy. Perhaps instead of going to the supermarket a couple of times a week, you might be able to sort of make it once a week. We do, not everyone is able to make these changes, and for some people they do need to rely on their car. That's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to get every single person out of their car or banning all cars. It's about those who can to make their behaviour changes. It's not easy to change behaviours, and they don't happen overnight. And so we are wanting to give this trial enough time so that we can see those behaviours hopefully start to happen. And again, I'll just come back to the monitoring. So the monitoring of our traffic counts on the boundary roads and the internal roads, as well as some other roads in the area, are all part of our monitoring strategy, which will be considered when we're evaluating the project.
Cool. Does anyone else want to add anything to that? No? Okay, great. Thank you. We've got a number of questions coming in about Brownlow Road and what the plans are for the bus gate and the effects of closing Brownlow Road. Christina, is that something perhaps you could talk to, or Richard to add to as well?
Sure,
Yeah.
I can pick it up and initially.
I
Oh,
can
that sounds
start,
like Richard will. Sure.
if you like. Yeah, sorry, it feels like I'm having connection problems. I do apologise. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Brownlow Road, as part of the current consultation, we've been seeking views on some information will be important as we do this exploratory work with Haringey to look at the wider area. So the idea of that work is to try to understand what is there a different looking scheme if we consider a direct across the area. So when we put forward the scheme with the time constraints that we were provided for from the DFT early in the year, or last year, sorry, we were only looking at the Enfield area. So if we now, with more time and more funding, we can look look at a wider area with Haringey, we can then understand whether there's any changes to the current design that might need to come forward, and where would operate as well, part of that wider scheme. So I think it's important that we consider that within the context of that work with Haringey.
Great, thanks, Richard. We've also got a question that says the BBC reported recently that around 6,000 motorists have been fined as a result of the quieter neighbourhood changes, suggesting that the signage in the area is inadequate. Will we be making changes to improve the signage, and is it a revenue-raising exercise? Richard, is that something perhaps you could talk to again?
Yeah, yes, and I think actually if we just go to the next, I think we actually have an image of
the next slide.
Yes, please. Yeah, yeah, to answer that question.
Next one again, please.
When we've been looking at the design, when we've been looking at the design of these schemes, we've been looking at how we can also just go one more next slide. There's a bit of closure. So when we're designing these schemes, we've been doing that in discussion with the emergency services, and it's been important for them, obviously, that they have a number, and for everybody, that they have a number of unhindered routes to use, and that's why we've used camera closures in this instance, so that the emergency services can continue to travel up and down Warwick Road unhindered, which of course is this situation is an improvement upon the previous situation where it was a width restriction was in place at that level. We're going to do that. We think the is adequate, and what you can see here is the no motor vehicle signs. I think that a lot of these schemes are sort of cropping up all over London. I think it's some people might not be familiar with this sign, and so there is more to take it that people have to. But if you're a motor vehicle, it means that you can't go past or through where that sign is. Now, we have been asked, well, why aren't you using a no entry sign? And I do want, because I think there's a general feeling that that people more recognise that sign more. And that means that emergency circles travel through that closure point either, and the whole point of this closure point is to make sure that the emergency services continue to pass through. So we don't want to be seeing anybody go through there except the emergency services, and we have seen that as the scheme has bedded in, that level of non-compliance has certainly dropped considerably. Does anybody else want to add anything on that?
Yeah, I'll just come in off the back of that, Richard, if I may. Just to say apologies to viewers for some of the connection issues we're having tonight. I don't know whether it's as bad as out there as we can hear it in here, but there's some gremlins in the system. But just to pick up on this issue, I mean, there is a theory that these are money-making filters that we've put in with regards to cameras. That is far from the case. What they're in there for, as Richard said, and I hope you could hear that, was unhindered gates for the emergency services. I'm on record as saying I would rather that these made no money whatsoever, that people were adhering to the signs and not going through the filters, and going through these filters puts pedestrians in danger, puts cyclists in danger. So, the fines are coming down as people, understand these signs and what these signs mean. They're in the highway code. And just one final point, that the money that is made from these filters, from these camera enforced filters, goes towards our bill for the wonderful Freedom Pass, which is the Freedom Pass for our elderly, for our disabled across the borough. £11 million is our bill for that, and these fines go towards that. They're ring fence for that. I was investigating whether we could possibly use some of the revenue for school streets cameras, but that is still under discussion at the moment. So I'll hand back to you, Liz. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. I think I'll ask the next question to Christina. We've got a couple of questions that have come in around safety at night and safety of women. One in particular says the LTN streets currently feel quite unsafe at night, partially due to lack of people in the streets, some of which may be COVID related, but not wholly. Is provision being made for assessment of perceptions of physical safety and not just of reduced traffic flow?
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, this is certainly something that, due to very unfortunate circumstances, has come to light much more prominently recently, although it has been something that we have been aware of in the past, as we have seen comments as they have been coming through. And I guess I'll start by saying I do really empathise with those comments, and I do know what it's like sort of walking around on my own as well. So it's not just for women, but it is for the safety of everyone. And so as part of our monitoring strategy, you will have seen a line item around crime and antisocial behaviour. So what we're doing with that is we are engaging regularly with the Met Police, and we will be reviewing crime data before and after implementation. So that's probably our main way of monitoring crime in the area. And I also want to note that I've been looking at a study from Rachel Aldred, who is a professor at the University of Westminster, and she's published a study around Waltham Forest and one of their LTNs, and it's reviewed quite a lot of crime data over a long period of time. And it was a promising outcome. Obviously, we're not Waltham Forest, we are different, but it was promising to see that study did have positive findings. So that's just something that we'll be including throughout our monitoring. I've just also wanted to revert back to the Brownlow Road, because that was just a particular time when Richard's connection was cutting short. So I'll just sort of hopefully plug in a couple of the gaps. So, you know, unsure exactly what was heard at the time, but I think the idea that Richard was trying to communicate was that we are working alongside and engaging with Haringey as they are exploring their scheme, and they have had some engagement occurring at the same time. So we are looking at what potentially an area-wide scheme might look like, and because we know that the borough boundaries aren't visible on the ground, you know, people are part of the scheme, and it's not just Enfield residents that are affected by what our current scheme is. The other point is that if a decision is made around Brownlow Road, every single property will still be able to be accessed. We don't know what anything's going to look like yet, because we need to go through the work and figure out, sort of make the decision on this scheme first. But we will be looking at the area as a whole.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that. I've got a question. I'm wondering if perhaps Councillor Barnes could answer this one. If the scheme proves unpopular with residents, are we going to remove or cancel the scheme completely rather than try to tweak and impose it anyway?
Okay, so initially we are going to try, we've got the consultation going on at the moment, and we're going to try and change the scheme. We know it's not perfect. We know there are issues with it. You know, we are going to look at, you know, what those issues might be, how those changes might happen. But we have the added complication now that we have Haringey as well. So anything we do now has to take Haringey into consideration with regards to the way that they're going to install their LTNs, which will complement our LTN. So we are going to change it, and we hope that will bring people on side. But ultimately, down the line, if it is hugely unpopular, yes, then there is the potential to remove it. But what we would like to do first is go through those transitions to see, how we can change it so that it becomes more popular with local people, solve some of the issues that we've been hearing about. We've spoken to several groups in Bowes, and if we can solve those issues, then hopefully more people will come on side with the LTN. I think that also, Haringey, their LTN is going to solve some other issues as well. We've seen some issues around because of the LTN not being a complete cell. Now, when I say that, if you look at the diagram of our Bowes LTN, you can see the roads that would complete the cell, and that's what Haringey is doing. So basically, we'll keep changing it, and hopefully we'll get more people on side. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks, Councillor. I've got a question, I think, back to Christina, if I can. Are the team monitoring traffic volume and speeds on the A406 and surrounding roads? Do we have data for the surrounding roads?
Sure. So yes, the A406 is definitely one of the roads that we are monitoring. That is one of the because that road itself is managed by Transport for London. We are able to use some of their data that they have for their ongoing monitoring of the North Circular and some of their other strategic roads. So I think one of my earlier slides showed that location, and we're also looking at a location slightly further away from the scheme that is still on the North Circular. And so the idea is that we'll be able to use sort of both data sets in order to look at the effect of the scheme and amongst the other locations that we're also monitoring.
Great, thank you. Dave, wondering if you could answer this next question. We've got a question that says, what about people who cannot cycle or walk far? Perhaps from a policy perspective, but also EQIA perspective. Is that something you could answer?
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. So I think that's a really good question. So we're monitoring quite closely all the comments that are coming through in the engagement responses that we have. It is something we want to understand a little bit more about, and will be one of the subjects in the focus groups that we talk about, is some of those transport links and how people get to various appointments that they may have as a result of a disability or condition they might have. I'll just pick up on one other question in there as well, if I may, Liz, which is just the sort of why not a fuller EQIA prior to the scheme going in, and there's a simple answer to that, in that there are two ways we can sort of do schemes. There's experimentally, where we can put a scheme in, see what happens as a result of that, and assess whether it's worth permanence. The second type is to do it permanently, and permanently is usually associated with a comprehensive pre-consultation period. When we do that, it doesn't allow us to make any changes after it goes in. So what the experimental phase allows people to do is to literally tell us what their experience is. There are some adjustments to all of our lives that have to be made when changes like this are made, and what we're kind of interested in seeing is people's literal experience, which is why the fact that the scheme is in and we can see literal impact rather than perceived what the impact could be, it's really helpful for us to understand what we could do in the way of changes or further work. So hopefully that covers it off. But if you've got any further questions, please put them in the chat and I'll come back to it.
Great, thank you. I think I'll ask this one to you again, Dave. Why wasn't the EQIA and consultation with businesses and residents not undertaken before implementation of the scheme? So perhaps talking about the experimental traffic order and how that operates.
Yeah, so we did do an equality impact assessment before we commenced the experiment, but before we make any degree of permanence about it, so as we go through an experimental phase. At the end of it, we need to justify retaining the scheme. There isn't a sort of automated process where it just becomes permanent. It is a process where we have to compile a report, we compile what we see, and as council officers, the job isn't to make one case or the other, it's just to present the facts as we now see them on the ground. And one aspect of that is the fuller equality impact assessment. So in the course of doing that, that allows, you know, where people articulate their literal experience of this scheme and how it's impacted, it does give us more opportunity to then make any changes that might help mitigate any of those impacts, because there are sort of benefits, and you know, and there are times when it disbenefits as well. Trying to understand what that balance is currently and whether there's measures we can make that help improve that balance is really important. So the, you know, the short answer, yes, we did do some work. The comprehensive work is what is being done now while the experiment is running. So it's quite quite a detailed process that we have to go through before we get to the next stage around equality. Okay, Liz?
Yeah, great, thank you. There's a few questions that were coming about the data that we're collecting, Christina. So how are we accounting for the impact of COVID on traffic and air quality data, as well as longer journey times? How are they being accounted for in our monitoring?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Liz. So in terms of COVID, yes, we did collect data in 2020, and clearly COVID was, the restrictions of COVID will impact the data, and to differing levels, because we've taken some in July and then we've taken some in November last year. And there's, so in July, in November, obviously we're in lockdown, and travel was very different. So what we're doing around that is we are using, we've got the count sites on the North Circular Road are continuous counts, and so we've got long periods of data where we can have a look at some of the potential impacts that COVID has had on the data set, and we'll be making some adjustments to the data. But the other way we'll be doing that is looking at historic data that we've got across the borough and in this area as well. So there are various roads that we are counting in last year, which we have data for prior years as well. So we'll be using sort of a combination of data to carry out sort of I don't want to say complete assessment, but in order to sort of make its assumptions about the level of impacts that COVID has had on that data. The other thing we're doing, and it may have been missed during Richard's connection issues, but it was that we are planning on repeating some traffic counts later in summer, in summer later this year. And at that point, we're hoping that restrictions will have eased and traffic will be returning to more normal levels.
Great, thanks for that. Richard, wondering if you could come in about exemptions of residents' number plates and number plate recognition within the area to allow local residents ease of access into the area.
Yes, thanks, Liz. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. I think that's not something that we've been considering for the scheme at this stage. So what we, you know, there are been some suggestions around, you know, creating gated communities and such like, and that's not something that we're trying to do. We've set out, you know, what the sort of aims and objectives of the scheme are, and you know, I think there are issues if you live in the area and you benefit from less through traffic. There is an associated disbenefit of that, which is the fact that it's potentially more inconvenient, or you have to now go on a different journey in order to access your home. So we think that if you simply just enable people within those areas to have the benefit of no through traffic, but they could come and go as they wish through camera enforced closures, that you know, arguably that wouldn't be the type of approach that would align with our objectives of trying to reduce the overall level of short journeys, whether it's people living in the area or outside of the area. Of course, notwithstanding that, there's a whole level of administration and costs that would be associated with that as well. So it's not something that we're considering introducing at this stage in the project.
Great, thank you. Richard, while you're there, has anyone pushed for the A406 to be updated? Are there any plans for improvements on the A406?
No, I mean, I think I've heard of ideas and the sort of previous sort of potential plans around tunnels and things such like that. I'm not aware of any plans like that. So clearly the A406 is a major road, and that's what makes this particular area, an even bigger challenge. That is a sort of, it's such a major road, and I appreciate the implications and the impacts of that can have on people who need to adjust some of their journeys, which might involve the 406 more than that they would like. But obviously it's a TfL-owned road, so it could be that they're thinking of something that I'm not aware of, but I don't believe there's any proposals to sort of fundamentally change it. I think one of the things that we do need to do is we work with Haringey. We also need to work with Transport for London. As we look at this wider area plan, are there any other changes that we should be considering collectively in terms of particular movements that may or may not be allowed? And I think that's something that we do need to have a conversation with TfL around. That's not necessarily an easy thing, but it's something that we certainly need to explore, I think, as part of this next stage.
Great, and on the A406 theme,
sorry, Liz, sorry, Liz, to interrupt. May I come off the back of that? What I'd like to say just about the A406. I mean, it's a blight on the southern part of our borough. It's effectively a motorway, travelling through the southern part of our borough. What I would love to see, I know the government is, the Chancellor is considering this at the moment, is road user charging, and road user charging will have a profound effect on roads like the North Circular. That's a personal view of mine, but I know that it is something that the government are considering at the moment, and will make it not just on the A406, but on all roads, on all main roads, that road user charging. There's two reasons why I think the Chancellor, why this will appear in the coming years. The first is that the Conservative government have a 10-point plan, and in that 10-point plan, they talk about the need to reduce pollution, the need to reduce emissions from our vehicles, which is in Enfield is 39% of our borough's emissions are from our roads. So that's one thing that the government the other thing is that the government, when we transition to electric vehicles, the government is going to lose out on that fuel tax. So at the moment, there's nothing replacing that, and so there is going to be a hole in the government's finances. So that's something that I think will profoundly help roads like the North Circular, and I think it will probably come in the next few years.
Great, thanks, Councillor. There's a few comments coming in and questions about the right turn from Warwick Road, saying that that's quite it feels unsafe and it's quite an unsafe junction. Are there any plans to improve that junction, Richard?
So I think that's the right turn into Warwick Road.
Sorry,
as you're coming along, the 406. So again, I appreciate the sort of concerns that people are raising there. We did have that looked at before we implemented this trial as part of our road safety assessment work, but which the independent conclusion of that was that it's safe. But I do understand that it might not. That's not how it might feel, and if you've got to be making that turn more frequently. So I think that's something that we need to look at, and I think that's something that we need to consider as part of this sort of wider design. We are hearing from some people that they prefer to exit, from the southern end of the area rather than the northern end, and that's something that we're considering, and again that we'll discuss with Haringey as we look at a wider area plan. Thanks.
Great, thank you. There's also been a question about could we have a heat map upon which we can make comments which can be seen by all, like Haringey have done, Ealing and others. So I think I can answer that and anyone else can jump in. At the moment, we don't have any plans to change the way that we're collecting comments. So we have taken the approach of using a survey, which, as you all know, is a very common method of collecting feedback. We've chosen to do that because we wanted to collect quite detailed information and have a detailed analysis of the comments that we're receiving, but also who is saying that, because we are, as Dave's explained, we are looking at the Equalities approach, the 9 protected characteristics as outlined in the Equality Act 2010. So we felt that the survey was the best way to go about that. I think there have been concerns around the transparency around the comments. We will be publishing the report that's produced by the agency who we're working with to conduct that analysis and reporting, and a summary as well as a response to the issues raised will be included in the report following the trial. So yeah, no plans to have a heat map. It is something we use on some of our other projects in our other consultation and engagement projects, but it depends on what phase of a project that we might use that. So we are open to feedback always on how we're engaging you, how we're engaging other residents, businesses, stakeholders. And as you'll see in the consultation and engagement plan that we've uploaded today, we've listed some of those stakeholders and invited people to share any others that you think would be worth us engaging with. Does anyone else want to add anything on that? No? Okay, cool. So we've got a question that's come in around tackling sports car related antisocial behaviour, speeding along roads, loud traffic noise and racing along the streets. Are there any plans to address these kinds of concerns and issues? Richard?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be useful to understand a bit more detail about that, and if there's any patterns to when that type of activity is happening. It might well be something that my colleagues in in different departments are already aware of. I haven't heard that or seen that raised many times, but for this particular area, I know it's a problem in different parts of the borough. But if I think that would be a good one to email healthystreets@enfield.gov.uk. Provide us with a little bit more detail on that, and we can come back to you, and we can also pick that up with colleagues and discuss that with the police as well, potentially.
If I can just come off the back of that, Liz.
Yeah, sure.
Just to say that it's an ambition of mine to make the borough 20-mile-an-hour speed limit throughout the entire borough. This has happened in several of the boroughs in London. So at the moment, I've asked officers to do some work, which I know is going on, to research the implications of making our roads 20 miles an hour. There's a financial aspect to that as well. So I'm hoping later this year, some of that research will be available, and we can perhaps look towards that ambition, because it won't just make our roads safer, it will reduce the pollution and lots of beneficial effects that will go along with that. So, I hope that's something that will happen. I think it's worth noting, though, that will only be our roads. We as Richard has alluded to earlier on, there are TfL controlled roads throughout our borough, and so the onus would be on TfL to perhaps look towards reducing speed limits as well.
Great, thanks, Councillor. Perhaps another question for you, actually, Councillor Barnes. If you're hoping to reduce pollution, what electric car infrastructure are you putting in?
Okay, so we have started, or we're very close to starting a lamppost trial. We're very close to starting an electric lamp charging from a lamppost trial. The work is going on at the moment with regards to that. We're finding technical issues with regards to installing the charging infrastructure in the lamppost, but we will get it done. That's a trial. I'm hoping that trial is successful. That will be then rolled out across the borough, pending funding. And some of those charging points are in Bowes. What I would like to say, though, is that, you know, electric vehicles are not this panacea. They're not this solution to pollution that everybody seems to think they are. You know, 50% of the pollution from vehicles is from brake pads and tyres. You know, electric vehicles will still have brake pads. They'll still have tyres. But, you know, saying that, you know, we will get that 50% reduction, which is something that we would love to see. And it is a step change towards, you know, fewer emissions in the future. But let's not fool ourselves thinking that electric vehicles are zero emission vehicles, because they're not. So, you know, they're part of our future, but, you know, hopefully going forward, we'll see more scientific advancements with regards to tyres, brake pads, that kind of thing. Obviously, what I would like to see people doing is active travel. I mean, leave your Tesla at home, walk, cycle, you know, just only use that car for those essential journeys, those journeys that you can't walk or cycle. Just have a think when you pick up the keys, you know, can I walk, can I cycle, can I use public transport when it's safe? Thanks, Liz.
Thanks, Councillor. We've had a few questions coming in about the perception survey that we ran in 2019. So how were the participants for the perception survey selected, and how was it publicised and accessed? So I can help with that one. So the perception survey, from memory, was open for about 5 or 6 weeks. More information is in a summary report available to download on the project page. There was information delivered to all properties within the area, and there was some social media activity on the council's Facebook and Twitter pages at the time. It was also run through the Let's Talk platform, so a very similar way that you access the consultation survey now. But like I said, there's a summary report that details a bit more information about that process that we undertook, and that you can download that on the project page. Richard, wondering if there are any pre-scheme cycling counts for the roads now being monitored, and if these could be published if we have them.
I believe there are. We've taken cycling counts are incorporated into the traffic counts that Christine has already talked about. So when we do that monitoring, we do take into account cycling numbers. So we will have that, and that will, you know, we'll be publishing when we come to do the reporting. We will be publishing that. So we're not intending to sort of drip feed information. We want to package up the data that we've got and present that in the context of a report. But naturally, through the use of the report, we'll be sort of summarising what some of those key issues are. But all the raw data, for those that want to see it, will be available, and it will be you know, transparent, so people can look into the detail of that. But yeah, cycling levels is one of the things that we want to monitor.
Great, thanks. And a question about supporting people who are walking through the area. So if the aim is to get people to use their cars less, do we have plans to make the pavements more user-friendly, particularly for people using mobility devices and who may be particularly car dependent? Richard, sorry, that's for you.
Yes, thanks, Liz. Yeah, so I think, you know, it's a good point, and so we do have a process of the council has some funding set aside to do footwear renewal type projects. There is a mechanism on the council website where you can report problems as well. So if there's particular issues of particular, if there's some trip hazards or that kind of thing. But I absolutely agree. We need to do more to improve the conditions of the footways and things with the resources that we've got. It's clearly a huge borough, and we need to sort of allocate that funding where it's needed most. But if there's particular areas in the borough that you think would benefit from us looking at, or sorry, particular areas within this project area, then do let us know, and I'll take that out with my colleagues, and we'll get someone out to have a look.
Great, thanks. I've got a couple of questions have come in about the Equalities work, Dave. So wondering if you could identify the groups that we mentioned. Have we considered gender issues in the EQAA process?
Yeah, thanks, Liz. Yeah, so we have considered. So I think at the moment what we're seeing in the survey responses is we monitor the gender split. So at the moment that's pretty good in terms of what we're getting as feedback. That includes looking at things like pregnancy and maternity as well, where we've got some good representation there. So understanding now, when we get the full analysis of that work, it's just understanding what that means for those people and how the scheme has impacted on it is part of what we can now do. And just to pick up on something around the heat map and sort of link it to that, one of the reasons we sort of use the survey very particularly is it does allow us to see the trends and patterns in response from particular groups, so we can see issues that are raised very particularly by women or by disabled people or people from particular faith groups, and we can see sort of trend and pattern information in that, which is really helpful. Where you've got you're using sort of heat maps and you have sort of an anonymized comment, it's really difficult to then understand how individual groups within that sort of heat map are affected. So that's exactly the sort of thing that the survey allows us to see. So yes, it will form part of that. It's very much part of the Equality Act, and for the final equality impact assessment, certainly there'd be a section on gender and also a section on maternity as well.
Great, thanks, Dave. Councillor Barnes, wondering if you're able to talk about the democratic processes around the project.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. I mean, democracy is something that's talked about quite a lot, particularly on social media. I just want to make it clear that low traffic neighbourhoods were in our manifesto, which 55% of the borough voted for. That's why we have a Labour administration in this borough. There have been accusations that they're not in our manifesto. They are in our manifesto under the quieter neighbourhoods umbrella. Now, a trial was conducted in the Fox Lane LTN. That was unsuccessful. That was by a previous councillor, and that was then going to move towards an LTN model. Modal filters were being talked about. So that sort of covers the fact that it was in our manifesto. I think it's also worth bearing in mind that a few weeks ago we had a democratic debate in full council. The Conservative opposition made it their priority opposition business. There was a full debate on low traffic neighbourhoods, and a democratic vote was taken at the end of that debate, and the democratic vote suggested that the LTN programme will continue, and we will try to put LTNs across the entire borough. I think the final point I'd like to make, Liz, is that people who are against these schemes are trying to stop two consultations taking place, and I think that's completely undemocratic. I mean, let's have the consultations, which are happening at the moment. Let's look at the results. Let's analyse them. And then when that final decision is made based upon those consultations, that will be open to full scrutiny within the council process. So again, that's democracy in action. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks, Councillor. We've probably got time just for one more question, and Richard, wondering if you could answer this, please. It's that LTNs offer the opportunity to enhance public realm as more space becomes available, for instance, to install parklets, rain gardens, play facilities for children, benches, etc. Once the design gets finalised, what opportunities will there be for public realm improvement, and will the community be invited to co-design this?
Okay, thanks, Liz. I can answer that. I do think we might have time for a couple more questions, though. We've still got 9 minutes or so. So let's. I know there's a lot of questions coming in, but I think we can squeeze a few more in. So that's a good question, and something that is something that we do want to look at. I think the answer is if. And clearly no decision has been made on this scheme, but if a scheme like this does become permanent, then there is that opportunity, as the questioner suggests, to improve the public realm in particular areas. So where you've placed, but where you effectively can create more public realm space. So there's opportunities in those spaces for community gardens, for tree planting, for more cycle parking, for seating, and yes, I think doing that design, sort of co-design, a valuable thing to do. At the moment, because these are just experimental trials, the materials that we've used are quite basic and temporary. They can be lifted in and out, without an excessive amount of cost. Once you get to a point, if it is decided on that, then that's when you can start to upgrade the environment at those locations. Now, I think I should say that that's likely to take some time. So again, it's something that I think would take place over time. We wouldn't want all of them under areas that also got significant problems that we want to look at, but over the years then we'd want to look to create those public realm pockets in each of the low traffic neighbourhoods that we might create.
Great, thanks, Liz. Richard. Thanks. Richard, you're still cutting out a little bit, but while your connection is slightly better, someone's requested that you provide the answer again to the question around Brownlow Road and the bus gate.
Okay, I think Christina's covered it as well.
Yeah, she's covered it, but I think we've been asked since then.
So, I mean, I don't know what the specific nature. I'll turn my camera off again in case that helps. The specific nature of the question is, but the bus gate will now be considered as part of this wider area design. So it's quite a significant intervention that needs to be considered in the context of the wider area. It's something that we absolutely continue to look at, and the feedback that we've had from the phase 1 consultation will into that, and there will be another opportunity, as we've always said, I think, that once we've got a bit more clarity on what that design might look like, where it might be placed, how it might operate, then we need to make sure there's an opportunity for for the community to provide some feedback on that as well. Hopefully, hopefully that covers it.
Thank you. Thanks. A question we get asked quite often is the government in favour of low traffic neighbourhoods, or is it just the councils? Councillor Barnes, is that something you could answer?
Yep, I can certainly pick that up. Yes, I mean, the government is in favour of low traffic neighbourhoods. The Conservative government made it an election promise in December 2019, November 2019. And also it's in their 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, which is how we are going to become net zero as a country by 2050. So big support from the government. They have funded BOEs. Everybody knows that the Conservative government has funded BOEs, and the Conservative government has given us another 1.5 million, which I mentioned in my introduction. So, I've reached out to the Enfield Conservative Party and said, let's work together. This is climate change. Your government's in favour of it. Let's have some cross-party work because climate change is such a big issue. They don't want anything to do with it. I wish that they would follow their government's lead, because climate change is a big issue and is something that many residents in our borough and across the country, let alone the world, worry about. So, I'll repeat it again tonight. The Enfield Conservatives we can work cross-party on this. We can make a success of our climate change policies, and the LTNs are one of them. So, please think again would be my message. Thanks, Liz.
Great, thanks, Councillor. Dave, we've got a question about the survey that we've recently launched for people with disabilities and carers. So what have we done for those who are not online and who may need assistance to complete this? I can also help with this response. Yes, that's the question. So just to start, sorry, Dave, we first of all included information on how to access the materials in another format, if that's in other languages, or if it's in larger font, Braille, or over the phone. So we have sent out a number of paper copies and included a letter, the paper copy of the actual survey with the letter that was delivered. So we have been receiving a lot of those back, and thanks to those of you who have done that. More information was available in the letter or the email that was sent out to people invited to take part in that survey. And if there was a phone number particularly for people who may need to verbalise their responses. Dave, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I guess I think it's a really important question, actually. So just in general terms about people who feel quite isolated from all the processes because it is difficult to engage with them, which I fully get. So one of the things we do in the survey is we get lots of responses from carers on behalf of people. So one of the things that we're sort of assessing is the rate of response that we're getting sufficient to pick up on some of those issues. The disability survey was an additional exercise that we thought it would be good to run, very particularly for disabled people, to give a particular view. The way we did that is we used sort of blue badge information, but as I know, a lot of disabled people want to probably say at the moment not everybody has a blue badge. We get that. It's a case of trying to throw the net to the people that we can, to invite them very directly to come and give us their views, which they have and continue to do. So I would hope that the carers, the people who do get a direct invite, and the people that have completed the survey so far, my feeling is that they do form quite a good representative group. But as we go on with the focus group, there are some issues around mobility and things that we want to look at in more detail, which is where we'll get in more conversations. But I think that's all, Lisbeth. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much. So thank you all. I think we are now coming to the end. I'd just like to thank everybody. Councillor Barnes will sort of wrap up very briefly, but just my own thanks to both everybody who's come along and participated, but also to the team as well. Just a couple of quick things. You can submit ideas about how you think the design should be changed in the current consultation, so please do that. We'll be writing to homes to let people know when the consultation comes to an end in May, so we're reminding people about that. And we're looking at bringing forward, as lockdown eases, some other measures hopefully for the area. We're looking at some doctor bike provision, some second-hand bike markets in the area. And someone asked about an e-cargo trial. We are doing that in another area, and we're open to suggestions for businesses, that is. So we'll continue to reflect on the way that we're delivering and taking feedback and looking at the way that we can improve doing things. It's been a challenging period for us all, but thank you for your feedback and your constructive comments, whether they're sort of for or against the scheme. They all help us learn. If I could just pass across to Councillor Barnes, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you, Richard, and I'm just going to pass my thanks on to you and your team tonight for the webinar. Thank you to everybody who's taken the time to watch tonight. It may not have answered all of your questions, but please bear with us, particularly going forward with regards to our integration with Haringey and our work with Haringey, which is having quite a strong, is dictating largely the way we go forward with regards to our programme. And I'd also just like to say, please be aware of misinformation on social media. There's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of fabrication out there. Look at our project page. If you think that something is missing from our project page, please let us know, and we'll try to get a frequently asked question, an FAQ together that we can put on there that will answer future questions. So thank you. Have a good evening and take care.